The acrid smell of gasoline saturated every corner of the house. Thomas struck the match, his hands trembling with rage and jealousy as he prepared to end everything. His wife, his children, the audacity that had poisoned his perfect control. But Genevieve wasn't home. She'd left minutes earlier, driven out by his sister's venomous insults. Inside, 8 months pregnant and alone, his sister Carmen screamed as flames erupted around her, climbing walls, devouring furniture, consuming oxygen. The house became an inferno. And when Genevieve returned with Will, the unthinkable choice presented itself. Save the woman who tormented her for years, or let karma burn. If you want to know what happens next, keep watching. And don't forget to like and subscribe. This story will shock you. 6 months earlier, the kitchen tiles were cold beneath Genevieve's bare feet as she scrubbed at the stubborn grease stain on the stove. Her knuckles ached. They always did these days, but she kept working, kept her head down, kept her mouth shut. That was how she'd survived 23 years of marriage to Thomas Okafor. At 45, Genevieve's face still held traces of the beauty that had first caught Thomas's eye at that church social in 1999. But those traces were buried now beneath premature lines of worry, beneath the permanent tension in her jaw, beneath eyes that had learned to look down, always down, never meeting his gaze directly unless he demanded it. Genevieve, Thomas's voice boomed from the living room, and she flinched, the scrubbing pad slipping from her fingers into the sink. Yes, Thomas. She dried her hands quickly on her worn apron and hurried to him. He sat in his leather recliner, the one piece of furniture in their modest Lagos home that was off limits to everyone else. His 52-year-old face creased with the permanent scowl she'd come to know so well. His polo shirt stretched tight across his growing belly, and he held the television remote like a scepter. Why is my dinner not ready? It's past 7. The stew needed more time, too. I don't want excuses. He didn't even look at her. I work all day at that godforsaken company, dealing with incompetent people, and I come home to a wife who can't even have food ready on time. Genevieve's fingers twisted in her apron. I'll have it ready in 10 minutes. You'll have it ready now. She turned back toward the kitchen, her chest tight with familiar humiliation. From upstairs, she could hear her daughters, 16-year-old Ada and 14-year-old Chioma, doing their homework. At least, she hoped they were doing homework. Thomas had made it clear they'd finished secondary school and nothing more. Why waste money on university for girls who'll just get married anyway? He'd said countless times, usually in front of them, watching as their faces fell. Her son, Michael, 20 years old and in university on a scholarship Thomas hadn't paid for, rarely came home anymore. When he did, there was a hardness in his eyes that reminded her too much of his father. Genevieve had been 19 when she married Thomas, barely educated beyond secondary school, raised in a village where girls were taught that marriage was the ultimate achievement. Thomas had seemed like a blessing then, a man with a job in the city, older, established. Her parents had been thrilled. He'll take care of you, her mother had said, adjusting Genevieve's wedding veil. Just be obedient. Be humble. That's all a man needs. So she had been. For 23 years, she had been obedient and humble, and it had gotten her a husband who treated her like property, daughters whose potential was being wasted, and a son who'd learned all the wrong lessons about being a man. That night, after Thomas ate his dinner without a word of thanks and retreated to their bedroom, Genevieve sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold between her hands. Through the window, she could see the lights of Lagos sprawling in every direction, each one representing someone living a life she couldn't imagine. Mama. She looked up to find Ada in the doorway, her daughter's intelligent eyes worried behind her glasses. Are you okay? Genevieve forced a smile. Of course, sweetheart. Just tired. Ada hesitated, then came to sit beside her. Mama, I want to ask you something. What is it? My teacher, Mrs. Okonkwo, she says there are scholarships for girls who want to study science. Full scholarships for university. Ada's words came faster, more urgent. She thinks I could get one. My grades are good enough. Mama, I could become a doctor. I could. Ada. Genevieve's voice was gentle but firm. You know what your father says. But Mama, no, Ada. I'm sorry, but no. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. Your father has decided, and that's final. Ada's face crumpled, and Genevieve felt something crack inside her chest. Her daughter stood abruptly and left without another word. Genevieve sat alone in the kitchen as midnight approached, listening to the sounds of her family sleeping, wondering when exactly she'd stop being a person and become merely a function. Cook, cleaner, wife, mother, each role defined by service and none by worth. She didn't know that everything was about to change. That tomorrow, she would meet someone who would see her not as Thomas's wife or Ada's mother, but as Genevieve, a woman with potential she'd never been allowed to explore. Tomorrow, she would meet Sarah. Sarah Morrison was impossible to miss at the Saturday market. While other shoppers negotiated prices in rapid-fire pidgin English, Sarah, blonde, cheerful, hopelessly optimistic, beamed at everyone she met, her Igbo heavily accented but earnest. "Ah, this yam is beautiful," she exclaimed to a vendor who looked both amused and bewildered by the white woman's enthusiasm. "How much?" Genevieve had noticed her before. She was a regular at the market, hard to miss and harder to ignore. But today, Sarah's bag split open, sending oranges rolling across the dusty ground in every direction. "Oh no! Oh no! No! No!" Sarah scrambled after them, and Genevieve found herself kneeling to help before she'd consciously decided to do so. "Thank you so much," Sarah panted, clutching oranges to her chest. "I swear, I buy a new bag every week and they all fall apart. Is there some secret to bags I don't know about?" Genevieve smiled despite herself. "You need to get them from Mom and Ngozi, not the young boy on the corner. His bags are cheap, but they don't last. See? This is exactly why I need friends who actually know things." Sarah laughed, then stuck out her hand. "I'm Sara Morvison. I teach at the international school here. Well, I try to teach. Mostly I embarrass myself with my terrible Igbo." "Your Igbo is very good," Genevieve lied politely, shaking her hand. "You're sweet, but we both know that's not true. What's your name?" "Genevieve." "Genevieve Okafor. It's so nice to meet you, Genevieve." Sarah's smile was so genuine, so warm, that Genevieve felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. When was the last time someone had looked genuinely happy to meet her? "Hey, I know this is forward, but would you want to get tea sometime? I've been here 6 months, and I've made exactly 0 friends. Everyone's very polite, but I can tell they think I'm crazy." Genevieve hesitated. Thomas wouldn't like it. He'd ask questions, make accusations, probably forbid it outright. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. That tea became a weekly ritual. Sarah talked about her life teaching, about growing up in California, about her love for Nigerian food despite her inability to handle pepper. And slowly, carefully, Genevieve began to talk too. "You were top of your class in secondary school." Sarah's eyes widened. "Genevieve, that's incredible. Did you ever think about continuing?" "My parents, they didn't have money for that. And then I met Thomas. But you could go back now. There are programs, adult education." Thomas wouldn't allow it. Sarah's expression shifted, something harder entering her usually soft eyes. "Wouldn't allow it?" Genevieve realized her mistake too late. "I mean, he doesn't think it's necessary. And he's right, really. What would I do with more education? I'm a wife and mother. That's enough." But Sarah didn't look convinced, and Genevieve found herself talking more over the following weeks, sharing details she'd never voiced aloud before. About Thomas's rules, his anger, the way he made her feel small. About Ada's scholarship opportunity and how Thomas had refused. About Chioma's love for mathematics that would never be developed. About Michael and the anger that seemed to be consuming him. "You know that's not normal, right?" Sarah said one afternoon, her voice gentle but firm. "The way he treats you, that's not what marriage is supposed to be. You don't understand our culture. Don't do that. Don't hide abuse behind culture." Sarah reached across the table, covering Genevieve's hand with hers. "I've lived in Nigeria long enough to know that plenty of Nigerian women have good marriages with men who respect them. This isn't about culture. This is about control. The word hung between them, and Genevieve felt tears prick her eyes because it was true, and hearing someone else say it made it real in a way it never had been before. "What can I do?" she whispered. "I have no education, no money of my own, nowhere to go." "Then let's fix that." Sarah squeezed her hand. "Genevieve, you're smart. You're capable. I've seen it in how you talk, how you solve problems, how you manage everything with no resources. What if I help you start something? A small business just for you?" Thomas would never. "Then don't tell him. Not yet. Start small. Build something that's yours. And then, when you're ready, you'll have choices." The idea was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. Genevieve had never had something that was hers, never made a decision that wasn't filtered through Thomas's approval. "I don't know the first thing about business," she said. "Then learn. I'll help you. We'll start with something simple. Maybe making and selling that amazing chin-chin you made for me last week. People would pay good money for that. We could start at the market, see how it goes." It was ridiculous. It was impossible. It was everything Thomas had told her she couldn't do. "Okay," Genevieve said. "Let's try." The first batch of chin-chins sold out in 2 hours. Genevieve stood at her small table at the market, watching in disbelief as customer after customer returned for seconds, praising the perfect crunch, the hint of nutmeg, the way it wasn't too sweet. "You have a gift," an older woman told her, pressing extra naira into her hand. "Don't let anyone tell you different." With Sarah's help, Genevieve registered a small business, Genevieve's Delights. She worked in secret, making her snacks late at night after Thomas slept, storing her supplies at Sarah's apartment, depositing her earnings in a bank account Thomas didn't know existed. For 3 months, it worked perfectly. Her business grew. She added puff-puff, meat pies, small chops for parties. Word spread. She hired 2 other women from her neighborhood to help with production. She felt alive in a way she never had before. When customers praised her food, when she counted her earnings, when she solved problems and made decisions, she was Genevieve, not just Thomas's wife. She was someone. Then Thomas found the bank statement. She came home from the market to find him in the kitchen, her secret account statement in his hand, his face twisted with rage. "What?" he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Is this?" Her mouth went dry. "Thomas, I can explain. You've been lying to me." He advanced on her, and she backed into the counter. "Sneaking around, taking money, doing God knows what behind my back. It's a business. Just a small business. I sell snacks at the market." "You sell snacks?" His laugh was ugly. "You? My wife, hawking food like some common market woman. I'm making good money. I could help with household expenses, with Ada and Chiyoma's school fees." His slap came so fast she didn't see it coming. Her head snapped to the side, her cheek exploding with pain. "You will close this business immediately," he said. "You will give me every naira you've earned, and you will never, ever lie to me again. Do you understand?" Genevieve touched her burning cheek, tasting blood where her teeth had cut her lip. And something inside her, something that had been growing stronger these past months, refused to break. "No." Thomas froze. "What did you say?" "I said no." Her voice shook but held steady. "I'm not closing my business. I worked hard for it. It's mine." For a moment, she thought he might hit her again. Instead, something worse crossed his face, cold calculation. "We'll see about that," he said quietly. Then he walked out. The first sign of trouble came 2 weeks later when the market authorities suddenly required new permits. Expensive ones that would cost more than Genevieve's monthly profits. Then the health inspector appeared, citing violations that didn't exist. Then her supplier raised prices specifically for her, claiming new market rates that none of her fellow vendors faced. Thomas was dismantling her business piece by piece, using his connections, his male privilege, the networks she'd never had access to. Within a month, Genevieve's Delights was hemorrhaging money. She sat in Sarah's apartment, crying for the first time in years. "He's going to win," she said. "I can't fight him. He has all the power. Then we get you more power." Sarah's jaw was set with determination. "Genevieve, You're too talented to let him destroy this. But you're right. You need help. You need someone with resources and connections who can level the playing field. Who? I don't know anyone like that. Yes, you do. Sarah smiled. You know me. And I know someone from church who might be able to help. His name is Will. William Harrison attended the International Church Sarah went to, a small congregation that met in a school gymnasium, diverse and welcoming in a way Genevieve's traditional church never had been. She'd gone once with Sarah, and while Thomas had grumbled about her associating with those foreign churches, he'd allowed it because it kept her occupied and away from his notice. Will was 58, black American, with gray creeping into his close-cropped hair and smile lines around his eyes that suggested a life full of genuine laughter. He ran a small but successful import-export company and had lived in Lagos for 15 years. Sarah tells me you're a hell of a cook, he said when they met after service, his handshake firm and warm, and that you're dealing with some business troubles. Genevieve glanced at Sarah, uncertain, but her friend nodded encouragement. My husband doesn't approve of my business, she said carefully. He's been making things difficult. Something shifted in Will's expression, recognition, perhaps, or knowing. I see. Tell me about your business. What were you making? What were your numbers like before the trouble started? As she talked, explaining her products, her customer base, her profit margins, she watched his face. He asked smart questions, taking her seriously in a way Thomas never had. You know what I see here? He said finally. I see someone who took nothing and built something profitable in 3 months. That's entrepreneurial talent, Genevieve. Real talent. Her throat tightened. Thomas says I'm foolish. That I'm embarrassing him. Thomas is wrong. Will's voice was gentle, but absolute. And he's scared. You know why? Because you proved you don't need him. Men like him, they build their whole identity on being needed, being in control. When someone they've controlled shows independence, it terrifies them. I don't know what to do, she admitted. He has all the connections, all the power in this city. Not all of it. Will smiled. Look, I have a proposal. I need someone to handle event catering for my company. We do a lot of business dinners, corporate events, that kind of thing. I've been using a service that's overpriced and mediocre. What if you took over that contract? Genevieve stared at him. I don't have the capacity for that. My business is barely surviving. I'll front you the startup costs. You hire the staff you need, get the proper equipment. I'll give you 6 months to prove you can deliver quality consistently. If you can do that, I'll refer you to every business contact I have in Lagos. And trust me, my friends have deeper pockets than your husband connections. Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me. Will's expression turned serious. I grew up watching my mother break her back for minimum wage while my father spent every penny on liquor and told her she was worthless. I watched her believe him for 20 years before she finally left. When she got her freedom, you know what she did? She went to community college, got her nursing degree, became head of a hospital department. She had all that potential inside her the whole time, just waiting for someone to see it and give her a chance. He met Genevieve's eyes. I see your potential, Genevieve, and I'm offering you a chance. What you do with it is up to you. Genevieve thought about Ada, who should be applying to medical schools, about Chioma, who could be a mathematician, about the life she'd lost at 19 and the years she'd spent small and silent and invisible. I'll take it, she said, and I'll make you glad you believed in me. I already am. The first event was a dinner for 30 business executives at a fancy hotel. Genevieve barely slept the week leading up to it, testing recipes, coordinating with her small team, second-guessing every decision. When guests began complimenting the food, asking for business cards, requesting her services for their own events, she felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Hope. Over the next 6 months, she built Genevieve's premier catering into something remarkable. Will was true to his word. He introduced her to his network, vouched for her quality, gave her credibility she never could have earned on her own. She hired more staff, rented a commercial kitchen, created a website. Her daughters helped after school, and she paid them teaching them about business and independence. "Mama, you're amazing," Ada said one evening, watching her mother coordinate 3 events simultaneously. "I didn't know you could do all this." "Neither did I," Genevieve admitted. And it was true. She was discovering parts of herself that had been buried for decades. The money came too. Real money. Within 8 months, she was earning more than Thomas. She paid for Ada's university applications herself, in secret. She put money aside for Chioma's future. She opened accounts in her daughter's names that Thomas couldn't touch. And, slowly, she began to change. She bought clothes she chose herself, not drab things Thomas approved of. She spoke up more in her own home, defended her daughters when Thomas complained about their behavior. She stopped apologizing for existing. Thomas noticed. "You've developed quite the mouth since you started this little business," he said one evening, his tone mocking. "Suddenly you're too important to show your husband respect?" "I respect you," Genevieve said, meeting his eyes. "But I also respect myself. And I'm not going to stop my business just because it makes you uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think I'm uncomfortable? I don't care about your little catering games, Genevieve. Play around if you want. But remember who you are. Remember who I am." But she did remember. She remembered exactly who he was, the man who'd kept her small and scared for 23 years. And she remembered who she was now, someone who'd built something real, something valuable, something that was hers. Michael came home for the weekend, and Genevieve barely recognized her son. At 20, he developed his father's aggressive stance, his father's quick anger. He got into a screaming match with Ada about something trivial, and when Genevieve intervened, he turned on her. "Stay out of it. This is between me and her." "Michael, don't speak to your mother that way," Ada said, stepping between them. "Oh, what? Now you're defending her? She's finally paying attention to you because she's making money? Where was all this when I was growing up?" The accusation hit harder than any of Thomas's slaps. "Michael, I've always been here. Yeah, being pathetic, being weak." Letting him, he gestured toward the bedroom where Thomas watched television. "Treat all of us like garbage. At least now you're doing something, but it's too late. I learned everything I needed to from watching you two." He stormed out, and Genevieve stood in the silence he left behind, her daughters on either side of her. "He's wrong, Mama," Chioma said softly. "You're not weak. You never were. You survived," Ada added. "That took strength. And now you're showing us how to do more than survive. How to actually live." But Genevieve worried about Michael, about the anger festering in him, about how her son had somehow absorbed all of his father's worst traits and none of his own potential for kindness. It would be years before she understood the full extent of the damage, and by then it would be too late to fix it. Thomas began following her. Genevieve noticed his car parked outside her kitchen facility, saw him at events she was catering, found him talking to her employees and clients. He was looking for something, some evidence of wrongdoing, some excuse to tear down what she'd built. When he found out about Will, he thought he'd struck gold. "So this is how you've been doing it," Thomas said one night, cornering her in their bedroom. "I should have known. No way a woman like you could build a business on her own. You've been sleeping with that American. That's ridiculous. Well, is my business mentor. Don't lie to me." His voice rose, and she heard the girl's bedroom door open down the hall. Ada and Chioma listening, worried. "I've asked around about him. He's not married. He spends all this time with you, gives you money, introduces you to people. Why would he do that unless you were giving him something in return?" "Because he's a good person who wanted to help someone with potential," Genevieve said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Something you wouldn't understand, because you've spent 23 years trying to make me small instead of helping me grow. So now I'm the bad guy? I'm the man who gave you a home, children, my name. And I gave you 23 years of obedience. 23 years of cooking and cleaning and asking permission to breathe. I raised your children, ran your household, made your life comfortable, and the one time I try to do something for myself, you punish me for it. You're my wife. I'm a person. The words exploded out of her, years of silence finally breaking. I'm a human being with thoughts and dreams and abilities, and I'm sorry that threatens you, Thomas, but I'm not going back to being that scared girl you married. I can't. I won't. He stared at her, and she saw something dangerous in his eyes. You've changed. Yes. I don't like it. I don't care. He left the room, and Ada and Chioma appeared in the doorway, their faces both worried and proud. Mama, are you okay? Ada asked. I am. I really am. But Thomas wasn't done. He went to his family, his mother Martha, a bitter woman who'd never liked Genevieve, his sister Carmen, who took every opportunity to remind Genevieve of her low-class origins. Together, they began a campaign of harassment. Martha showed up at Genevieve's facility unannounced, criticizing everything, demanding she close the business and stop embarrassing the family. Carmen spread rumors about Genevieve's affair with Will, telling anyone who would listen that Genevieve was a prostitute who'd abandoned her wifely duties. The worst moment came at a family gathering. Martha called Genevieve to the center of the room, in front of 30 relatives, and demanded she explain herself. My son says you're refusing to be a proper wife, that you're running around with some foreign man, neglecting your home and children. Is this true? Genevieve felt every eye on her, felt the weight of expectation, that she would crumble, apologize, submit. I'm running a successful business, she said clearly. I've doubled my household income. My daughters are excelling in school. I'm neglecting nothing except Thomas's desire to control every aspect of my life. Martha's face twisted with rage. You ungrateful. After everything this family has done for you, Thomas married you when you had nothing. You were a village girl with no education, no prospects. I'm still that girl. I've just discovered I'm capable of more than you all told me I was. You're having an affair. I'm not. But honestly, Martha, even if I was, it would be none of your business. My marriage is between Thomas and me. The room erupted. Half the family screamed at her about respect and tradition and knowing her place. But the other half, particularly some of the younger women, looked at her with something that might have been admiration. Carmen lunged forward, grabbing Genevieve's arm. You think you're better than us now? You think your little business makes you special? No, Genevieve said, pulling her arm free. I think it makes me free, and that terrifies all of you. She walked out of that gathering with her head high, Ada and Chioma flanking her like guards. Thomas stayed behind with his family, and she absolutely knew, that they were plotting something. The divorce papers were Genevieve's idea. She'd saved enough money. Her business was stable. Will had offered her advice on legal protection and connected her with a lawyer who specialized in helping women leave difficult marriages. I want you to think carefully about this. The lawyer, Mrs. Adebayo, said in her office. In cases like yours, when a woman has more resources than the husband, things can get dangerous. Men like Thomas don't handle rejection well. I know, but I can't stay. Not anymore. My daughters deserve to see that women can choose their own lives. Mrs. Adebayo nodded slowly. All right, but promise me you'll be careful. Get security cameras for your home. Make sure people know where you are. And if he threatens you, even once, you call the police immediately. Genevieve served Thomas the papers on a Tuesday evening. She'd thought carefully about timing. The girls were at Sarah's house for tutoring, giving them privacy for what she knew would be an ugly confrontation. Thomas read the papers twice, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and something else, something cold that made her stomach drop. You want a divorce? Yes. Because of him. That American. Because of me. Because I deserve better than this marriage. You deserve, he laughed, and it raised the hair on her arms. You deserve nothing. You were nothing when I found you, and without me, you'll be nothing again. I don't need you, Thomas. I haven't needed you for a long time. He stood, and she forced herself not to step back, not to show fear. You think you can just leave? Take my children, my home. I'm taking my children to a better life. You can keep the home. I'll fight you. I'll destroy you. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of woman you really are. Do your worst. I'm not afraid of you anymore. That was a mistake, showing him she had no fear. Because Thomas needed her fear. He fed on it. Without it, he had nothing. Get out of my house, he said quietly. Now, before I do something we'll both regret. Genevieve left, went to Sarah's apartment, and stayed there with her daughters. For 3 days, Thomas didn't contact her. She thought maybe he was accepting it, processing the reality of their separation. She was so terribly wrong. On the 4th day, Thomas went to his mother's house. Martha greeted him with cruel satisfaction, and Carmen was there too, 8 months pregnant and furious on her brother's behalf. She needs to be taught a lesson, Martha said. A lesson she'll never forget. A lesson that will show all these modern women what happens when they abandon their families. What are you suggesting? Thomas asked, though he already knew. He'd been thinking about it for days, dark thoughts that grew darker in his isolation. Fire purifies, Martha said simply. Fire destroys. And sometimes, fire is what's needed to cleanse a corruption. Thomas thought about Genevieve laughing with Will. Thought about her confident voice as she defended herself. Thought about his daughters who now looked at him with disappointment instead of fear. Thought about his son who'd absorbed all his anger and none of his love because he'd never learned how to give love, only control. I'll need gasoline, he said, and I'll need to know when she's home. Carmen smiled. Leave that to me. I'll make sure she's there. The plan was simple. Carmen would go to the house. Thomas had kept his key and start an argument with Genevieve. She'd been doing it for years. It wouldn't seem unusual. She'd get Genevieve angry, agitated, make sure she and the girls were all inside. Then she'd leave, giving Thomas the signal. He'd pour gasoline around the house's perimeter. The old building would go up fast. He'd checked, researched, planned it meticulously. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it would be too late. He told himself he had no choice. That Genevieve had forced him to this. That this was her fault for being disobedient, for embarrassing him, for daring to be more than what he decided she could be. The gasoline was heavy, the cans sloshing as he loaded them into his car trunk. It was 8 p.m. on a Saturday. The neighbors would be inside, eating dinner, watching television. No one would see. No one would know until the flames were visible, and by then it would be over. He parked 2 blocks away and walked to his house, the house where he'd lived for 18 years, the house where his children had been born. The street was quiet. Through the windows, he could see lights on upstairs, Ada and Chioma's room, his daughters, his children. For a moment, doubt flickered. Then he remembered Genevieve's face when she'd said she didn't need him, and the doubt burned away in rage. He went to work. The gasoline made dark stains on the ground as he poured it around the house's foundation, along the walls, near the doors. The smell was overwhelming, acrid and chemical. His hand shook but didn't stop. Inside, Carmen had arrived. She'd let herself in with the spare key Martha had kept, and she was doing her job perfectly, screaming at Genevieve about disrespect, about breaking up the family, about being a whore who'd seduced some foreign man for money. Get out of my house. Genevieve shouted back. You have no right to be here. This is my brother's house. You're nothing but The argument escalated, Chioma and Ada emerging from upstairs, defending their mother, telling their aunt to leave. Carmen smiled. Perfect. All of them together. But then Genevieve grabbed her purse and keys. I'm not doing this. Girls, we're leaving. Now. You can't just walk away from me. Carmen blocked the door, but Genevieve pushed past her. Watch me. Ada, Chioma, come on. They left, all 3 of them, walking out the front door and to Genevieve's car parked down the street. Carmen stood in the doorway, stunned and furious. This wasn't the plan. They were supposed to stay inside. She pulled out her phone to call Thomas, to warn him, but he was already done, already preparing the match. Carmen felt the first spike of fear. Thomas, they left. Don't. But she was inside the house, and Thomas was outside, circling to the back, to the kitchen door. He didn't hear her calling, didn't know his sister was there. He struck the match. The gasoline caught instantly, flames racing around the house's perimeter with horrifying speed. The old wood walls caught next, fire climbing, spreading, consuming. Thomas stepped back, watching it burn, feeling something like satisfaction before the magnitude of what he'd done began to sink in. Inside, Carmen screamed. Genevieve was 2 blocks away when she smelled the smoke. At first, she thought it was someone's barbecue, but then she saw the orange glow reflecting off the buildings ahead, and her heart stopped. Mama, is that? Ada's voice was high with panic. Oh God! Oh God! Genevieve turned the car around, her hands shaking so badly she nearly hit a parked vehicle. By the time they reached the house, flames were already consuming the lower floor, and she could hear screaming from inside. High-pitched, desperate, terrified. Someone's in there. Chioma grabbed her mother's arm. Mama, someone's in there. Genevieve's mind went blank with terror. The neighbors were emerging from their houses, shouting. Someone was calling the fire service, but all she could hear was that screaming, female, desperate, coming from inside her burning home. Stay in the car, she screamed at her daughters. Don't move. She ran toward the house, but the heat pushed her back like a physical wall. The front door was already engulfed, flames licking up the frame, smoke pouring out in thick black clouds. Genevieve, Will's voice cut through the chaos. He'd been driving to her house to drop off some contracts when he saw the smoke. Now he sprinted toward her, his face grim with determination. Someone's inside. Genevieve grabbed his arm. Will, I can hear someone screaming. The screaming had grown weaker, punctuated by violent coughing. Through the smoke, they could see a figure at an upstairs window. Carmen, her pregnant belly silhouetted against the flames behind her, her fists pounding uselessly against glass that wouldn't break. The side entrance, Will said, already pulling off his jacket. The kitchen door, if it hasn't caught yet. You can't go in there. You'll die. Then we call the fire service and hope they get here in time. We'll met her eyes. Or I try. Your choice, Genevieve. But we're making it now. She looked at Carmen in the window, at the woman who tormented her for years, spread vicious lies, come to her home tonight to participate in God knew what scheme. Every rational part of her said to wait, to let professionals handle it, to let karma run its course. But that screaming, the kitchen door, Genevieve said, I'm coming with you. No, that's my house. I know the layout. You don't. We do this together or not at all. There was no time to argue. Will soaked his jacket in a neighbor's garden hose and wrapped it around his head and shoulders. Genevieve did the same with her sweater. Together, they ran around the side of the house where the flames were less intense. The kitchen door was smoking, but not yet burning. Will kicked it open, and smoke billowed out so thick Genevieve couldn't see 3 feet in front of her. Carmen, she screamed into the inferno. Where are you? A weak cough from upstairs was her only answer. The interior of her home was hell. Flames consuming the curtains, the furniture, the walls themselves seeming to melt under the heat. The staircase was partially burned, groaning under its own weight. It won't hold much longer, Will shouted over the roar of the fire. We have to be fast. They climbed, each step threatening to give way, smoke filling their lungs despite the wet fabric over their faces. Genevieve's eyes streamed with tears, her throat burning, her skin feeling like it was cooking from the heat. Upstairs, they found Carmen collapsed beneath the window she'd been pounding on, her face gray with smoke inhalation, her pregnant belly heaving as she struggled to breathe. Carmen, Genevieve dropped beside her, and for a second, Thomas's sister's eyes focused on her with pure hatred even in her moment of death. You did this, Carmen gasped. You destroyed everything. Shut up and move, Will ordered, hauling Carmen up by her shoulders. Genevieve, help me. Together, they half-carried, half-dragged the pregnant woman toward the stairs. Behind them, flames were consuming the hallway, eating through the ceiling. Ahead, the stairs were barely holding together. It's not going to hold all our weight, Will assess quickly. Genevieve, you take her down first. I'll follow. Go now, Will. Now. Genevieve looped Carmen's arm over her shoulder and started down. Each step groaned and cracked. Halfway down, one step gave way completely, and Genevieve's foot plunged through, splinters tearing at her leg. She screamed, but kept moving, Carmen's weight threatening to topple them both. Behind her, Wolf followed carefully, his weight making the already damaged stairs shift and crack ominously. They made it to the ground floor. The kitchen door was still their exit, but the fire had spread. Flames blocked their path, fed by the gasoline Thomas had poured throughout the house. There's no way through. Carmen sobbed. We're going to die. My baby. There's always a way, Will said grimly. He grabbed Genevieve's kitchen tablecloth, soaked it from a jug of water that had somehow survived, and wrapped it around Carmen's torso. Cover your face. Stay low. And run like hell. They burst through the wall of flames, Genevieve's skin screaming where embers touched her, her lungs full of smoke and heat. Will was shouting something, but she couldn't hear over the roar of the fire. And then they were outside, stumbling into the night air, coughing and gasping and alive. Neighbors rushed forward with water, with blankets, with panicked voices calling for ambulances. Genevieve collapsed on the grass, watching her home, her business files, her children's baby pictures, everything she'd built, burned to ash. Ada and Chioma were suddenly beside her, crying and holding her, and she held them back, thanking God they were safe, that they hadn't been inside when Thomas. She looked up through the smoke and chaos and saw him across the street, standing frozen in the shadows beside his car. Their eyes met across the burning ruins of their life together. And she knew what he'd done, what he tried to do. Mama, who's that? Chioma followed her gaze. Is that Daddy? Thomas turned and ran. Stop him, Will shouted to the gathering crowd, but Thomas was already in his car, engine roaring to life. He peeled away from the curb and disappeared into the Lagos night. The fire trucks arrived 10 minutes later, but there was little left to save. Genevieve stood with her daughters, and Will and Carmen, ungrateful, bitter Carmen who even now couldn't bring herself to say thank you, and watched everything she'd built turn to smoke and ash. The police found Thomas at his mother's house 3 hours later. He was sitting in Martha's kitchen, his hands still smelling of gasoline, his face blank with shock at what he'd done. I didn't know, he kept saying as they cuffed him. I didn't know Carmen was inside. I didn't know. But you knew your wife and daughters were supposed to be, the lead detective said grimly. Or did you think the gasoline was just for decoration? Martha screamed at the police about false accusations and conspiracies, but Carmen, from her hospital bed where they were monitoring her baby, had already told them everything. About the plan, about her role, about her mother's encouragement. He was going to kill them, Carmen said, her hands on her belly, perhaps for the first time understanding the magnitude of what she'd participated in. He was going to kill Genevieve and her daughters, and I was going to help him do it. All three were arrested, Thomas, Martha, and Carmen. The charges were attempted murder, arson, conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming. The gasoline cans in Thomas's car, the receipts, the neighbor who'd seen him pouring liquid around the house, the testimonies. But the trial wouldn't come for months. In the meantime, Genevieve had to rebuild. She moved in with Sarah temporarily, sharing a small apartment with her daughters. The insurance on the house wouldn't pay out. Arson by the homeowner invalidated the policy. Her business files were gone, though her commercial kitchen had survived and many clients, hearing her story, rallied around her. Will was in the hospital for 3 days with smoke inhalation and second-degree burns on his arms from where flames had caught him. Genevieve visited every day, sitting beside his bed. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Risk your life for someone who hated me. It wasn't about her, Will said, his voice raspy from smoke damage. It was about you. About the person you've become. That person wouldn't let anyone burn, not even her worst enemy. I'm not that noble. I thought about letting her die. For a second, I really thought about it. But you didn't. That's what counts. The burns on Genevieve's leg required stitches and would leave scars. Her lungs felt damaged, her throat raw for weeks. But she was alive. Her daughters were alive. and Thomas's attempt to destroy her had failed in the most spectacular way possible. The story hit the news. Bitter, jealous husband attempts to murder wife over successful business. The coverage was intense, and suddenly everyone knew Genevieve's name. News crews interviewed her. Women's organizations invited her to speak. Her story became a rallying cry about domestic abuse, about male entitlement, about the lengths some men would go to maintain control. "I don't feel like a hero," Genevieve told Sarah one night. "I feel like someone who survived something that should never have happened in the first place." "That's what makes you a hero," Sarah replied. "Not that you won. That you refused to give up even when everything told you to stay small and silent." The divorce went through quickly. No judge was going to force a woman to stay married to the man who tried to burn her alive. Genevieve got full custody of Ada and Chioma. Michael, her son, she barely saw anymore. He'd been at university when it happened, and when he came home, he seemed torn between rage at his father and anger at his mother for provoking him. "If you'd just been a normal wife," he said to her one terrible afternoon, "none of this would have happened." "Michael, no, it's true. You embarrassed him. You made him look weak. You pushed him until he snapped. Your father tried to murder me," Genevieve said, her voice deadly quiet. "He tried to murder your sisters, and you're blaming me for that. I'm saying there are consequences to actions." Michael's face was red, his father's rage burning in him. "You can't just do whatever you want and expect no pushback." "Michael, listen to yourself," Ada interjected. "This is exactly what Daddy taught you. That women deserve violence for disobedience. That's not normal. That's not okay. You're all turning against him because of her." Michael pointed at Genevieve. "She poisoned you all against him." "He poisoned himself," Chioma said quietly. "We just finally saw him clearly." Michael left and didn't come back. He spiraled at university, falling in with a bad crowd. Boys who shared his anger, his resentment, his sense that the world owed them something. He joined a campus gang, violent and reckless, seeking the power and control his father had taught him he deserved. Genevieve tried to reach him, called him weakly, but he wouldn't answer. Her son was lost to the same poison that had consumed his father, and there was nothing she could do to save him. 5 years later, the courtroom was packed for sentencing. Thomas had been found guilty on all counts: 3 counts of attempted murder, arson, conspiracy. His lawyer had tried every defense, but the evidence was overwhelming. Martha got 3 years for conspiracy. Carmen, pregnant at the time of the crime, got 5 years suspended sentence and probation. But Thomas Okafor, the judge said, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom, "You attempted to murder your wife and children because you could not accept your wife's success and independence. You planned this act with premeditation. You obtained gasoline. You returned to what you believed was an occupied home and set it ablaze. That your sister was injured instead of your intended victims does not lessen your culpability. It merely highlights the depths of your depravity. You are a danger to society and to any woman who dares to challenge your authority. I sentence you to 25 years in prison without possibility of parole for 10 years. Thomas showed no emotion as they led him away. He looked at Genevieve once, and she met his eyes without fear, without hate, with only profound sadness for the years she'd wasted on him. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Genevieve, flanked by her daughters and Will, made a brief statement. Today justice was served. But justice won't bring back the years I spent afraid. It won't heal the damage done to my son, who learned from his father that violence is how you control people you claim to love. What I hope this case shows is that women's independence isn't a threat, it's a right. And men who can't accept that don't deserve to be called men at all. Ada squeezed her hand. At 21, her daughter was in medical school at the University of Lagos, top of her class, determined to become a neurosurgeon. The scholarships had come through after all, after the publicity from the fire had drawn attention to her talents. Chioma, 19, had just been accepted to the London School of Economics. She wanted to work in investment banking, to build wealth the way her mother had built a business, from nothing, with skill and determination. "Mama," Chioma said as they walked to the car. "Are you okay?" "I am," Genevieve said, and meant it. "For the first time in my life, I really am." Genevieve's Premier Catering had not only survived, but thrived. The publicity had brought more clients than she could handle. She'd expanded, hired a management team, opened a second location. She'd written a book about her experience that became a bestseller. She spoke at conferences about entrepreneurship and domestic abuse survival. She was successful, independent, respected. But her son, the news came on a Tuesday afternoon. Michael, 25 years old, had been killed in a gang fight at his university. Shot 3 times in a dispute over territory or respect or some other meaningless thing that young men with too much anger and no guidance kill each other over. Genevieve attended his funeral in a daze. She'd lost her son years ago to his father's poison, but this made it final. She stood at his grave and thought about the sweet boy he'd been before Thomas's rage infected him, before he learned that violence was strength and control was love. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the fresh earth. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you from him. I'm sorry I was too busy surviving to teach you how to live." Will stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. Sarah was there too, crying openly. Ada and Chioma held each other, mourning the brother they'd lost twice, once to anger, once to death. "It's not your fault," Will said gently. "You did everything you could." "I escaped," Genevieve said. "I got out, but I left him behind, and he paid the price. He made his choices, just like his father made his choices. You're not responsible for the poison other people choose to drink." But it would be a long time before she believed that. Epilogue. 7 years after the fire, Genevieve sat in her office overlooking Lagos, reviewing proposals for the 3rd location of Genevieve's Premier Catering. She was 52 now, gray threading through her hair, laugh lines around her eyes from years of genuine smiles. Her phone rang, the facility manager. "Ma, turn on the television. Channel 7. They're doing a story on Nigeria's top young professionals." Genevieve found the remote and switched on the TV in time to see her daughter's face filling the screen. Dr. Ada Okafor Harrison, the reporter said, at 26, is the youngest neurologist at Lagos General Hospital. She specializes in pediatric neurosurgery and has pioneered new techniques that are saving children's lives across Africa. Ada appeared on screen, confident and brilliant in her white coat, explaining her latest research. Genevieve's throat tightened with pride. "And she's not the only Okafor making waves," the reporter continued. Her sister, Chioma Okafor, is a rising star at one of London's premier investment banks. At 24, she's already managing a portfolio worth millions and has been named one of the UK's top 30 under 30. They showed footage of Chioma at some conference, poised and articulate, nothing like the shy girl who'd once been told she'd never amount to anything. Both sisters credit their success to their mother, entrepreneur Genevieve Okafor, whose story of escaping domestic violence and building a business empire inspired a generation of Nigerian women. Genevieve turned off the television, overwhelmed. Her daughters had become everything Thomas said they couldn't be, everything he'd tried to prevent. She thought about him sometimes, still in prison in Kirikiri. He'd be there for another 18 years. She wondered if he watched television in prison, if he saw his daughters succeeding spectacularly without him, if he felt any regret for the years he'd wasted trying to keep them small. Probably not. Men like Thomas rarely learned. They died angry, bitter, convinced the world had wronged them. But she'd learned. She'd learned that strength wasn't about control. It was about resilience. That love wasn't about possession. It was about freedom. That success wasn't about what others allowed you to do. It was about what you claimed for yourself. She'd paid a terrible price for those lessons. Michael was gone, his potential destroyed by the same toxicity that had nearly destroyed her. But Ada and Chioma were thriving. And she was free. Her phone buzzed with a message from Will, saw the news. "Your girls are amazing. Dinner tonight to celebrate? My treat." She smiled and typed back, "Only if I can bring Sarah." She'll want to brag about how she introduced us. Deal. 7 p.m. That fancy place you catered last week. Genevieve set down her phone and looked out over Lagos. Vast, chaotic, beautiful, full of possibility. Somewhere in this city were other women like she'd been, trapped, scared, convinced they had no options. Women being told they were nothing, that they could be nothing. She'd make sure her story reached them. Make sure they knew that escape was possible. That starting over was possible. That building something extraordinary from nothing was possible. Because if a scared, uneducated village girl could become this, could build a business empire, could raise daughters who became doctors and bankers, could survive a man who literally tried to burn her alive, then anything was possible. Genevieve Okafor had learned to be a phoenix, and she'd spend the rest of her life teaching other women how to rise from their ashes too. If this story resonated with you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear that escape is possible, that their worth isn't defined by those who try to diminish them, and that it's never too late to claim your power. Drop a comment below about what inspired you most about Genevieve's journey. Thank you for watching.